As we're closing in on the end of the year, I asked a bunch of YouTubers what their favorite writing advice was this year. The only requirement was that they had to do it all in under a minute, which I'm happy to report that all of them succeeded. We have a wonderful lineup of YouTubers. All you writers are really going to enjoy it, so I guess I'll get things started. My favorite writing advice of the year was a trick to instantly improve any description, which I mentioned in my video, Turn These 8 Types of Boring Scenes into Your Reader's Favorites. So most of us naturally write static description, which means we treat a place as a separate entity from our protagonist. For example, the cars were all streaked with mud because of yesterday's rain. But I would recommend using dynamic description, which is when you describe a place by how the characters are interacting with the elements. For example, mud-splattered cars zoomed past, close enough she could feel the wind on her face. Why is dynamic better? Because it makes the place matter physically to your character. Now, I'm not saying never do static description. I'm saying that your default should not be static description, and ideally you will mix your static description with a lot of dynamic description.
Hi, I'm Tim, better known as HelloFutureMe on YouTube, and I was at Worldcon sitting with a bunch of other authors and creators, and the piece of advice which really stuck out to me is how pacing, tension and release, rising and falling action, controlling that is so much more important than trying to fit a story to a 3-act structure, a 5-act structure, these kind of broader structures which people often focus on. A book which stuck out to me with this was Sword of Kaigen by Email Wong, which really kind of just doesn't deal with a conventional 3-act structure. It basically has like one big climax in the middle and then a long, slide down towards the end. But what it did do is perfectly control its pacing. There were a lot of tension and release, a lot of rising and falling within that, rather than trying to fit it to that abstract structure. And that just means that the reader is constantly engaged. They're putting a thing in and getting a thing out.
Hey John, it's Megan from my YouTube channel, Megan MacLaine. The best writing advice I heard this year was from Chuck Palahniuk's book, Consider This. He talks about the difference between writing in big voice and little voice, with big voice being more like the voiceover in a scene, and little voice being more like what the camera is looking at. For example, from The Golden Compass, from her not much of a hiding place, Lyra watched as the master went to a large oak wardrobe in the corner of the room, took his gown from a hanger, and pulled it laboriously on. That's little voice because we're seeing the scene unfold and it's active and in the present moment. But the next line is big voice. The master had been a powerful man, but he was well over 70 now, and his movements were stiff and slow. This line pauses the action to tell us a little more about who this man is. Palahniuk suggests leaning more toward little voice, especially at the start of a novel, to keep readers' attention and avoid slowing down the story too much. And I've found this really helpful when I think about the pacing in my scenes.
Hey John, Sasha here, also known as TheTaleTinkerer, and my favorite writing advice this year was the yes but no and framework for maintaining narrative momentum. Basically, the goal is to prevent your story from stalling by never letting your key scenes end with a simple success or failure. Instead, if your character achieves their goal, it's a yes but, meaning they succeed, but it creates a new immediate complication. If they fail, it's a no and, meaning they fail and the situation gets even worse. Think of the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark as an example here. Does Indy get the golden idol? Yes, but taking it triggers the temple to collapse, launching the next sequence of danger. Now, this is especially powerful for high-tension sequences, but don't overuse it. After all, sometimes characters just need a moment to breathe, process, or enjoy a simple win. If you apply it constantly without breaks, the story will become exhausting. So use it consciously, and when you do, make it count.
Hey John, it's Brandon McNulty, and as for my favorite piece of writing advice from the past year, I gotta go with one that I included in my book Story Made Simple. And it's the idea of thinking of your story's theme as a question rather than a flat statement. Now, typically when we think of a story's theme, we're thinking of statements like revenge leads to destruction. Now, the problem with a flat statement, though, is that it flattens creativity. It doesn't get our creative juices flowing. It doesn't invite us to brainstorm. But if we reframe a statement as a question, that opens up the door to all sorts of possibilities, and it invites us to tell a story that answers the question. So instead of going with a statement like revenge leads to destruction, try a question like how does revenge lead to destruction, and see where it takes you.
Hey John, AlyssaMatesic here. Thanks so much for having me. My channel is all about helping authors make their stories stronger and get published. My favorite writing advice from this year might sound scary at first, but can totally reshape your story. Cut your first chapter. Start with chapter 2, or even chapter 3. So many manuscripts I edit start with pages of setup, world building, setting description, character backstory. But what readers really want is to be pulled into a moment of tension right away, and the rest can be woven in later. Consider if The Hunger Games started a whole month before the Reaping, with Katniss just going about her daily routine in District 12. If the Reaping didn't happen until 50 pages in, we probably would never get there. So think about where your protagonist's journey truly begins. How close to that can you start the story? Don't start your novel on your protagonist's average day. Start it on the day that everything changes for them. It's going to give your opening so much more momentum and urgency.
John, thanks for inviting me to the video and introducing me to your viewers. My name is Cameron. I'm a writer, an editor, and the creator of the Wrestling with Words YouTube channel. The piece of writing advice that has really stuck with me comes from the book Spectacles of the Void by David Peake. Although this book explores the philosophy behind horror and the absence of information within a story, the thing that I took away is something that I think every writer can apply. Be intentional with the information you're giving or not giving to your audience. Knowing what information to withhold creates tension, dramatic irony, and intrigue. Knowing what information to give to your reader and when to give it to them fulfills plot promises, helps you create meaningful depth in your world, and enhances the pacing of your story. When it comes to giving information, this can manifest itself in many different ways. For example, when we use multiple point of view characters, like in The Mountain in the Sea, we can gradually explore deep philosophical questions from different points of view, while also meaningfully learning about the world with added context and granularity.
Hey John, hi everyone. My name is Joriam, and my channel is all about the poetics and the beauty of fantasy. We talk a lot about Studio Ghibli and Terry Pratchett. The piece of advice I paid the most attention to this year is all about building authenticity in your stories. And it's not about basing your story on other writers you enjoy. It's not about trying to evoke certain emotions like anger, melancholy, happiness, but instead creating narrative devices, and especially fantasy, around specific situations you lived in your life. How can you translate that day, that particular situation you lived, into fantasy? A good example of that is Hank Green's An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. In chapter 1, the main character interacts with this giant robot statue, and that gets her viral. But if you know Hank Green, you know that 10 years ago, he went viral on the internet, and that changed his life. And that scene is trying to bring us to a very specific moment of his experience. But, of course, with a fantastical twist.
Hi John, I'm Charlie, the creator of ThePlottery on YouTube. My favorite writing advice currently is learning the difference between a theme and a thematic argument and why your story really needs the argument. A theme is just a subject, good versus evil, finding your identity, whatever. But a thematic argument is a philosophical human point that your story is making about that subject, and that's what gives your character arcs direction. Take Wicked, for example. The theme is good versus evil, but the thematic argument could be something like staying true to your values will cost you something, but losing yourself costs a lot more. And you see that in Elphaba and Glinda's arcs. Elphie is punished for refusing to give into the system, but she keeps a very strong sense of self, and eventually she wins out emotionally. Glinda struggles against herself and her values, and it costs her a lot more in the end. If you only know the themes, your story drifts and your characters react randomly. But when you know the argument, it becomes the skeleton of every choice that they make. So don't just pick the theme as an afterthought. Make a point. Stories get interesting when they argue for something.
Hi John, and thank you so much for including me in this video. My name is ClaireFraise, and I'm on YouTube under WritewithClaireFraise, and my best writing tip for the year would be to outline my book with a plot grid. Plot grids have fundamentally changed the way that I outline my books. I learned about the method from reading an article about how J.K. Rowling outlined the Harry Potter books. Essentially, a plot grid is an outline that takes the form of a grid. Every row corresponds to a different chapter of your book, and every column corresponds to a different plot or subplot. I used to get really overwhelmed when trying to outline my books linearly because I would lose track of all of the different things that were going on, and a plot grid allows me to see what's happening in my book from a bird's eye perspective, which is very hard to do otherwise. I have made many videos on my channel explaining how I use plot grids and how plot grids work, so if you're interested in checking them out, visit my channel. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I wish you a great 2026.
Hi, I'm KMWeiland, and I run the writing website Helping Writers Become Authors. And my
favorite bit of advice that I shared this year, at least it was one of the more popular posts I did, was about 5 ways that you can end your scenes. And this is with turning points that bring your character to moments of change in which they're confronted with situations that either present them with a yes but, a no and, or a no but. And basically what these are doing is presenting the character with something where they get what they want, but that it has complications. They don't get what they want, but there's an opportunity to learn something and continue in a certain way, or they don't get what they want and there are consequences. The most important thing to remember about scenes is that the point of the plot, moving the plot, is to create change. You know you're moving the plot if you're creating change. And using this easy framework of 5 different ways that you can end your scenes is an easy way to do that.
Carson Long from Writing Theory here, and I've got 2 pieces of advice for you. First, the absolute best thing that you can do to improve your writing is not reading some revolutionary writing book or following a specific plot framework. It's just this: finishing a project. That's it. You will learn more about your writing style and your writing routine, your shortcomings and your strengths by just finishing something. It doesn't have to be a big project, right? You can even use smaller projects to experiment with your writing method and try new things. And secondly, most writing advice that you hear is not really writing advice. And I know, look, that sounds crazy, but what if I told you it was editing advice? Show, don't tell, kill your darlings, even things like giving your characters unique voices. These are things that you can apply in editing. But your first draft is all about progress and just telling the story to yourself. Then you edit it for other people. And that's when you kill your darlings. That's when you refine your characters. Don't let writing advice stop you from actually writing.
Hi, John. My name is lynndjung. I am a science fiction and fantasy author, and my favorite writing advice from this year has to do with world building. Specifically, it has to do with introducing world building by showing how it influences your characters' daily lives rather than simply info dumping. Now, this doesn't apply to all instances of world building. Sometimes you just gotta lay it all out there, especially when it comes to politics or more of that macro stuff. But I do find this particularly effective for the early chapters of a book where you're trying to set the scene and get the reader grounded. Info dumping in those early chapters can easily lose a reader, so you want to set up those concrete, important details by showing rather than telling. So next time you're trying to introduce critical world elements of your fantasy or sci-fi world, try to do so by showing how those elements touch and impact the lives of your characters rather than just spelling everything out for the reader. This is done so well by one of my absolute favorite reads of this year, and that was Jade City by Fonda Lee. So highly recommend checking that out if you haven't already.
Hi, I'm Kieran. I'm a writer and a freelance editor. And firstly, I just want to say a big thanks to John for putting all of this together. Instead of giving practical craft tips, the advice I want to highlight is more about our value as human storytellers. This past year, there have been so many headlines and debates and so much excitement and controversy over the capabilities of AI in the writing space. And something I talked about on my channel is that there will always be readers out there looking for human stories about human connection from human writers. And I don't think that'll ever really change too much despite technological advancements. So whatever kind of writer you are and whatever stories you write, I think writing them from the heart is one of the most important things that any of us can do, and something that will always have inherent value, whatever that heart might mean to you. So make that a priority as we go on, and I don't think we'll go too far wrong. Happy writing.
Hey, huge thanks to everyone who participated in this end-of-year roundup. And if you're not familiar with any of the channels featured in this video, I'm going to link all of them in the description below, so please check them out and follow them. Also, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see a similar video next year, please give this video a thumbs up and maybe we can make this an annual tradition. Lastly, if you have a piece of favorite writing advice that you heard this year, please leave it in the comments. I know a lot of writers would benefit from that, and thank you for watching this video.